it's a very nice platform during this pandemic period to exchange our academic knowledge and also to share some of the views from very unknown areas. So today's speaker uh, from Denmark hails from our country, from Patna. That gives us extreme happiness. Say, when we talk about several literature and especially diasporic literature, we talk about diaspora in a lengthy manner, but at the same time, when we see some of the scholars from India settled abroad are well renowned scholars, that gives we Indians a kind of pride and happiness. I'm really happy to meet Dr. Saumya in this platform. And today she has taken a wonderful area of study, climate fiction. And before getting into the introductory remark on the climate fiction, I'd like to introduce the speaker, Dr. Saumya Priya, who presently resides in Denmark and is the Vice President of International Dual Carrier Network, which is shortly called as IDCN, which is in Copenhagen. It's a globally known organization which has association of academic institutions and it facilitates international staff mobility. She received her PhD in English literature from Patna University, India. Her research focuses on the psychoanalytic study of characters in prequels and sequels in literature. She has a number of research papers to her credit, published in journals of national and international repute. Besides being a researcher, Dr. Priya is a passionate teacher with several years of experience as a lecturer, during which she has mentored and supervised students from all walks of life. She has received several important recognitions in her teaching and research career, such as Young Faculty Award and Best Research Presentation Award. She also has a postgraduate certificate degree in creative writing from the University of Kent, Paris, and is currently working on her short story collection. And nice to introduce the resource person to the virtual audience. So the title which she has given, actually before the meeting began, we had a short interaction. And I was even raising some doubts to her. She beautifully explained that. Like you people who are much want to listen to her, I am also eager to listen to her. When we talk about eco-literature, we analyzed some of the fiction there, we analyzed some of the drama or any other genre there. But for the first time, to be very honest, I am going to listen a lecture on climate fiction. So Dr. Thiruvalluvar has done some work on climate fiction because I remember him talking about climate fiction and recommending this area to his PhD ward. So now this is the first lecture I am going to listen on climate fiction. Like you people, I'm also very eager to listen to her. This climate fiction sometimes are called as cli-fi, that what the Google says. But at the same time, it concentrates on the climate change, global warming, and other natural resources which are being included in literature. I remember reading some of Amitav Ghosh novels which concentrates on climate change and global warming. I think the same would be the focal point. At the same time, I like to know the other tenets and the characteristics of climate fiction and the way in which she analyzes climate fiction. Thank you, Dr. Saumya Priya, for joining us in this platform. And now over to Dr. Saumya Priya.
Thank you so much, sir, for that warm welcome and the amazing introduction. I'm truly humbled. And thank you, Thiru, sir, for giving me this opportunity. And a very warm good morning or good afternoon to everybody in the audience. I will be sharing my screen since I have a presentation. So let's do that first. Okay. Yes. So, as we know that the topic of this two-day webinar is emerging trends in English literature, and climate fiction or climate change fiction is one such big emerging trend. And I'm really pleased to present my views on it today. So, before we begin, let's see what the objective of my talk today would be. I'll try to present before you all what climate change is, or how is it simply understood by all of us. Then, what actually is climate fiction, how it emerged, analyzing some of the common themes and settings in the sci-fi novels, and then climate fiction in English, climate fiction in translation, and then we move on finally to the conclusion. Let's take a look at what climate change is. So in very simple terms, it refers to a long time change in the average weather patterns that have come to define Earth's local, regional, and global climates. And it can be seen in the increased prevalence of droughts, heat waves, and floods. Climate change is not new, but definitely the rapid rate and magnitude of climate change now is what is the major concern worldwide. The United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, says that climate change is quite simply an existential threat for most life on the planet, including and especially the life of humankind. And I'm sure we all agree with him on that. Climate change, there are many rather factors, natural or human induced, which contribute to climate change. There's another writer from Australia, he's also an environmentalist, who says that climate change is part of everything now. And we will definitely agree with him because we see that climate change has become a part of literature now. But having said that, we also see that there are writers like Amitav Ghosh who believe that climate change has a much smaller presence in contemporary literary fiction than it does even in public discussions. And this is something which has to be thought over and taken up seriously. Now let's move on to see what actually do we mean by climate fiction. So, climate fiction, which is generally referred to as sci-fi, is an emerging and rapid growing field of literature which explores the potential drastic consequences of climate change. And Dan Bloom, who is a former American journalist, is credited for coining this term in the year 2008. And towards your right, you can see the smiling picture of Dan Bloom, the man himself. It is quite interesting to know that Bloom never tried to define this as a new genre. Instead, he only wanted to come up with a catchy buzzword, that too to raise awareness about global warming. And he surely has succeeded in doing that. And we see that he did coin this term in 2008, but unfortunately, it didn't become popular until 2012, when Margaret Atwood used the term in one of her tweets. So, Bloom credits Atwood for making the term sci-fi popular. And as a genre, we see that climate fiction has evolved from being just a subgenre of science fiction, and it is no longer marginal, but a viral topic in discussions. Now let's take a look at some of the definitions given by scholars of what climate fiction is. So first and foremost, referring to the Oxford English Dictionary, Climate fiction is a genre of fiction that deals with the impact of climate change or global warming. That's the simplest one. Then we see that Margaret Atwood says that climate fiction refers to books in which an altered climate is part of the plot. Karen a professor in Massachusetts, believes that climate fiction is resolutely contemporary. Very true. Another professor from Harvard says that it is one of the dominant forms of 21st century literature. Critic John Putra says climate fiction is famously genre-defying, and he prefers to call it a topic found in many genres. And Sarah Holding, who is a cli-fi writer herself, believes that it can reconnect. Just a second, I don't know what happened to the. Okay, so we are here. Yes, Sarah Holding believes that it reconnects young readers with their environment, helping them to value it more, especially when today a large amount of their time is spent in the virtual world. And Sarah Holding is quite right when she says this. Now let's look at the history, or rather the emergence of cli-fi as an independent genre. So we see that Daniel Clode and Monica Staesk, they have categorized the depiction of climate change fictionally, and they have tried to categorize into 4 steps. So the first one is pre and early scientific period, according to them. And this consists of various myths dealing with climate change, such as the disappearance of the sun, endless winters, or various other climatic catastrophes. These mythologies feature as punishments or redemptions and indicating end of the days. And it is to be noted that often they are said to be brought upon by the god, but it also implies that mankind has been responsible for calling upon itself all these calamities. And one glaring example of this could be the stories of the flood in the Old Testament. Moving to the second categorization, it is the early climate change representation period, during which climate change as a concept was relatively accepted, yet people were unsure of the causes. It is characterized by works describing catastrophic climate changes caused by comets or the oscillation in the Earth's axis. And one example of this could be Shelley's Frankenstein. The third one is mid-20th century, during which the writers Claude and Staesk believe that climate fiction was scarce, and fiction tended to reflect the contemporary fear, most pressing of which was the threat of nuclear destruction. However, even during this period, the Great Plains in the USA and Canada saw a period of powerful dust storms that became known as the Dust Bowl. And this ecological crisis has been reflected in the Grapes of Wrath. Now we move on to the last one, which is the period from 1960 onwards. This is the most important and widely read one, and it is characterized by stories of man-made climate change finding their way into fiction. During this period, human influence on climate was demonstrated with ever less doubt, leading to the coinage of the term Anthropocene, which is used to refer to a geological age characterized by collective human influence of the planet. So through this, we get to know how climate fiction emerged, and we cannot say that it has never existed. It has, but maybe in different forms. But what we now know as cli-fi has emerged through these various stages, and we'll be dealing with the last one, or we'll be looking at the last stage in details. Now, after looking at the history or the emergence of cli-fi, let's look at some of the usual settings which can be found in the cli-fi novels or the climate change novels. So, relating to the setting, it can be said that the setting could be either in the past, the present, or future. Also, at times, including all three. But majority of the climate fiction works are set in an undetermined and largely unrecognized future. Why? Because authors, they seem to favor a setting in a distant future, in a dystopian world created after a global natural disaster. So here, when I was pondering over this idea, I came across the thing that why always distant future? Why not the present? And why always dystopian? And to me, it did strike that maybe because if we put it in the distant future, we are not alarmed to that greater extent, maybe, and putting it in the dystopian context would make people anxious and fearful. And we know that fear is something which sells. Speaking of the setting again, we see that Earth, our planet, is always the setting. So unlike science fictions, where we see that the stories are set in other planets, maybe Mars or Jupiter, here in cli-fi, we mostly find stories to be set on Earth. And here on Earth, some of the common locations could be endangered cities, islands, and remote Arctic regions. Now, moving on from the settings, let's have a look at some of the common themes to be found in these climate change novels. So, as it is very obvious, the theme would be about climate change, global warming, and this could be a major theme or a minor theme. And these are visible or imagined changes about a very hard to contemplate future. These global changes or the global warming is often presented or depicted in the form of changes which we see around us. And the first and the foremost is in water. So we see that water that either disappears or fills spaces it should not appears to be a common theme in the cli-fi novels. So we see rising sea levels, storm surges, scarcity of water, even leading to wars between countries and groups. Another common theme is deadly heat waves, bushfires, and droughts. Depletion of resources like gases, oil, food, and again, a fight over them is also one of the themes which is dealt with by the writers. And nowadays we see that there is another important theme which is coming up in the climate fiction novels, and that is the idea of climate refugeism. It refers to people who have been made refugees by the climate because they are unable to live in the area they have been used to living. And they are merely wanderers now who are struggling to find food and shelter somewhere around. Lastly, the problem of the legacy of environmental degradation that humans today are handling down to the coming generation also seems to be one of the common themes. Now, based on the themes, I could say that cli-fi could either be of the nature of utopia, or it could be of the utopian nature, where the way of life is supposed to be that man is close to nature. Or it could be of a dystopian nature, where we see that man is completely or partially estranged from nature. So this is a classification which could be done on the basis of the theme which is commonly found in the climate fiction novels. Moving on, I've also tried to categorize the climate fiction novels or the cli-fi works on the basis of the language in which they have been written down. So I've classified them as Anglophone and non-Anglophone. So by Anglophone here, I simply mean the ones which have been written in English, originally written in English. That is the meaning which I connote with it here. And non-Anglophone refers to the novels which have been translated into English because they have been originally written down in some other language. This slide showcases a list of the novels, and I can't say that this is the only list. The list is long. I've picked up some of them, but it shows some of the Thalaivar novels which have been written down originally in English, mostly by writers who are either British or Americans. But then here we see Amitav Ghosh's The Gun Island too. And also we see the wind up girl, that is the fourth one, the fourth one from the top. And this one seems to be different because most of the novels have been set in US or UK, but this one seems to be set in Thailand, as Amitav Ghosh's novel, which seems to be set in India and US as well. So these are the novels which have been originally written down in English. And towards the right, you can see 7 novels, which again have been written down in English, but have been mentioned here separately because I intend to discuss them individually further in the presentation. And climate change novels have also been translated into English from various other languages. So we can't say that there are only British, American, or a few Anglophone writers who are writing about climate change. No, there are also other writers who are writing about it, but maybe they're writing it into their native language, writing it in their native language. But here is a list of the novels which can be seen to have been translated into English from either Dutch or German, Icelandic, Spanish, Norwegian, or Finnish. So the work on climate change or the reflection of climate change is being done by writers from all over the world, all over the globe. And the last 2 novels, as you can see, have again been highlighted in red because I wish to deal with them in the presentation further. And you might ask why only these 2 or why specifically these 2? To which I can reply that since I reside in a Scandinavian country and these 2 seem to be my neighbors here, I would like to take them up. In addition to novels, there are also short stories who have been written down about climate change. And here you can see the short stories, and there are also anthologies dedicated completely to climate change. And this is also important to know because there might be readers who are not willing to read a complete novel, but they might be willing to read a short story. And if such short stories could instigate in them the idea of how serious the issue of climate change is, that is well worth reading it. Now from here, we'll begin with discussing some of the novels which I have mentioned earlier. So the first one which I would like to take up is The Drowned World. So from the very title, one can make out that there is a world which supposedly has drowned in water. So this particular novel is a 1962 novel by the British author J.C. Ballard, and it is considered as a founding text in the literary genre of climate fiction. So possibly it could be called the granddaddy of modern sci-fi. This is set in an unrecognizable, tropical, flooded London in the year 2145. So we are again seeing a distant future, story set in a distant future. It follows a team of scientists who are researching the flora and fauna in what was once the UK's capital, but due to extreme environmental changes wrought by solar storms, it has now been reduced to a boiling swamp. And this particular novel depicts a world climatically changed through dramatic but natural causes. The next one in line is
Professor?
Which is optimistic. So here it depicts a city that's adapted to the water life. So we have buildings installed who have installed waterproof measures. We have garages for boats, and we see people walking on the skywalks that connects various buildings. So in this particular novel, an optimistic take on our future is done, and we see characters trying to make the world a better place. And there's a lot of importance on teamwork, which has been given by Robinson in this novel. It also looks at the varied social and financial impact of climate change. And most importantly, it reflects at the changes which civilization needs to make in order to survive. I think the word survive is missing here. Sorry for that. So we have seen two novels until now. Both of them being based on the theme of flooding or the rise of the water level, but the take of the writers have been different. So one sees it as a crisis or as something which is completely dystopian in nature. The other one sees it as something which, if handled well, could be or could appear to be an optimistic turn in our life. Now we move on to the third one. This is a novel known as We Are Unprepared. Again, the title says it all. This is by Meg Little Raleigh. It is a 2016 sci-fi, and it is set in the present. So we see that the earlier two or the previous two novels, they were set in distant future, but this one is set in the present. It is a story of a young couple, Ash and Pia, who move out of their trendy Brooklyn apartment to live in the picturesque rural Vermont. But it so happens that just 3 months in, or just 3 months after they have moved into this new place, there's a news of an unexpected, devastating storm. This prediction leaves everyone asking the same question, which is, how prepared are we? And this is a question which we can ask ourselves too. How prepared are we if now we are stuck by some natural disaster? So we see that in this novel, the fear of the impending disaster divides the close-knit rural town. Ash aligns with those who believe in working together for the common good, whereas Pia teams up with the preppers, who start a war with the rest of the locals over whom to trust and how to protect themselves. And it so happens that Ash and Pia find rifting, or there's a rift which comes in their relationship because they now understand that they are completely alike in their ideologies. The next novel which I would like to take up is Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver. This also is an interesting one because it has a very different theme. Here we see that the people, they are denying climate change. They are not ready to accept the idea of climate change. So this is an unusual novel for a climate change novel. This is set in a recognizable present. So this one is also set in the present as the previous one was. But interestingly, it has the climate change denial as its theme. It revolves around an event that is not a straightforward catastrophe. For here we see that a colony of monarch butterflies who, instead of making their way to their usual winter habitat in Mexico, suddenly appear in the Appalachian Mountains in North America. And this changed pattern of migration of these butterflies is a warning signal of a climatically changing world. However, when you read the novel, it is quite interesting to note that the local residents, they at first interpret it as a stunning divine miracle. But later, they try to capitalize on it financially by making that area a tourist spot. This novel beautifully combines the author's recurring interest in biological systems with her even more prominent interest in the psychology of people, especially women. Here we see that the protagonist is a female who finally, by the end of the novel, decides to leave her safe but unpassionate marriage and life of domestic course to seek higher education. It is to be noted that here the butterflies have been used as a metaphor to paint a picture of people resisting, struggling, or trying to adjust to the new environmental changes. The next in line is state of fear. This again is an example of a novel in which climate change is denied. This also appears to be a different one because it is filled with charts, graphs, and footnotes and seems to be bordering on non-fiction. So it appears to be a non-fiction more than a fiction. It presents climate change as something theoretical rather than real and threatening. In this novel, we see an eco-terrorist group called the Environmental Liberation Front, which plans to artificially create disasters to convince people of the threats of climate change. And the protagonist here is an international law enforcement agent who tries to fight the evil of this establishment, which is taking advantage of public ignorance and trying to distort the truth. So this novel tries to put the idea forward that the science behind global warming is speculative and incomplete, and there is no concrete conclusion regarding human involvement in climate change. However, this novel has received a lot of criticism from climate scientists and journalists and environmental groups for inaccurately providing information or for misleading the readers with information. The next one which I would like to speak on is The Carbon Diaries 2015. This is written by a British writer and it was published in the year 2009. It was quite interesting for me to read this one because in here there is an altered climate which is not just part of the plot, but rather the plot itself. This particular novel chronicles an year in Laura's life, who is a 16-year-old girl wishing to lead a normal life. And why isn't her life normal? Because we see that the story is set in UK where Laura lives. And in UK, the government has imposed a carbon rationing system. So imagine if that is done to all of us. That's scary, isn't it? So we see that in this novel, every citizen is given a card with a certain amount of carbon credit that they are allowed to spend each month. And an inability to make the carbon ration last for the entire month seems to be as shameful as poverty and also indicative of a certain moral failure. This novel brings forth the idea that this new system, which has been imposed by the government in order to prevent or in the wake of climate change, is very difficult for the people. It brings in a lot of emotional and psychological problems to the residents of the country. And in the novel, we see that the character Laura, she loses, her father loses his job as a tourist. Her boyfriend leaves her, and her sister, unable to reconcile with all that is happening around her, finally runs off to another place. Polar City Red is the next novel, which is by Jim Lotter. This novel we see is one of the best-selling American sci-fi novels. And here the concept of polar cities is based on the idea of British chemist and inventor James Lovelock. These polar cities, they serve as climate retreat or living pods in a worst-case climatic scenario. This novel is set in Fairbanks, a city in Alaska, in the year 2075. So this also is set in the distant future. It is about a family of Americans who are forced to leave their home because of the heat wave, which has made it uninhabitable. So this family of Americans, they are the climate refugees, and they are traveling, or they are trying to find a shelter for themselves. And on the journey, they are threatened by looters or survivalists who are living around the fortified perimeter of this polar city red. So this particular novel also has a very interesting theme. And with this, there is an idea which, not idea, there is an incident which comes in my mind, which is that it was this particular novel which, yes, which Dan Bloom was actually writing a foreword to. And while writing a foreword, or while sending it to the press, he just put in the word "cli-fi" without any intention. And he said in an interview that he had not done it intentionally, but when he was reading this novel, it appeared to him that it was something related with climate change, and he used the word "cli-fi" and sent it in the press. And it was from there that the word picked up, or it was picked up by the authors later. So up till now, we have seen novels which have been written down by writers in English, originally in English. Now we move on to the two novels which have been written down by authors in a different language, but have been translated into English. So the first one would be The End of the Ocean. So this is by a Norwegian writer who made her literary debut in 2012. This is second of her novels about how climate change and ecological destruction is reshaping the planet and human life. It was translated in English and published in January 2020. So this can be said to be the most recent publication, or the latest publication of the year. It focuses on two people, which are David and his daughter Lou, who again are refugees. So here in this novel also, we have the theme of climate refugees. So these two, the father and daughter, they are refugees, and they are fleeing from a climate-ravaged southern Europe. Their homeland has wilted in drought and become fractured by war. And on their journey, they discover a 70-year-old lady and her ancient sailboat. And it is through that incident that their journeys, they entwine. So this is a glittering book which follows multiple generations, and while following multiple generations, it tries to trace the climate change which has been happening through generations. Because we know that climate change is not something which has happened just yesterday. It has been happening. But now we see it even more, or it has become more visible to us now. The last one is The Memory of Water. This is written down by a Finnish author. It was published in the year 2014, and it was translated by the author herself. So she has been simultaneously writing an English version and a Finnish version. And the English language version of this particular novel has been shortlisted for numerous awards. So it's a very good one. This is set in a dystopian future where fresh water is scarce and thus a precious commodity. Global warming has destroyed the old world and its order, and we see that in this particular novel, China seems to be ruling Europe. The story is about a 17-year-old girl who is a tea master's apprentice, and she must come to terms with her father's great secret. And the secret is about the location of the hidden spring from where the water for the tea house derives. And with this secret comes a great responsibility. Because now, when she knows where that location of the hidden spring is, she has to decide whether she wants to share her family's precious water supply with her friends and fellow villagers and risk of being accused of water crime, which is punishable by death. So we see that this particular novel mediates on the value of natural resources, which is taken entirely for granted by the contemporary readers. Coming to the conclusion, we can say that despite the criticism for apparent lack of climate change representation in art, it is clear that there is a substantial body of climate change literature. And in here, human beings are presented as both the agents and patients of change. Also, through this presentation, we come to know that Cli-Fi is not always dystopian in nature. It is not always something which is pessimistic in nature. But there are novels who deliver a message of hope and optimism. But these Cli-Fi novels do not present a solution to the problem in question. However, they do inform and have the capacity to inspire action. They have the power to change doubtful, dismissive readers into a cautious and concerned ones. Given its popularity and potential for deeper understanding of environmental issues, climate fiction definitely seems to expand its foothold in contemporary fiction. And Cli-Fi, I would say, is here to stay and grow. Thank you so much for your attention. I would like to leave you all with this particular slide, wherein President Obama says that if we want to prevent the worst effects of climate change before it's too late, the time to act is now. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Saumya. It's a wonderful lecture, and it was very clear. That is really a thought-provoking one. And not even at one point of your lecture, we missed your voice or there was any kind of buffering, nothing. It was so clear and it was crystal clear. And similarly, your thoughts are. So I should thank you personally for giving us a wonderful feast of climate fiction.
Thank you so much, sir. And here I would like to add that climate fiction is something which caught my interest recently because back in India, I had never come across this idea of climate fiction or how it was different from a science fiction or climate fiction independently being given so much of weightage. But I see that now there's a lot of work being done in this area, and this has instigated my interest, and I'm really happy to have been able to share my views with everybody today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Because I remember even when you talked about the major themes of climate fiction, maybe water is one of the major themes.
Yes.
And there were
Yes.
some regional novels translated into English, and it's Tannir in Tamil and water in English, which is often
Okay.
prescribed for part 2 students or major students too. So I think without knowing the terminology, climate fiction, they bring everything under the eco-literature.
An umbrella
So,
term, yes.
yeah. So this is one of the first question I should like to ask in the forum, because many people, many scholars have asked the same question. So what is the difference between climate fiction and the eco-fiction genres? Say, for example, Mr. Gopi Krishnan, Mr. Marimuthu, and even Mr. P. Anand, they have shared the same kind of idea in asking you a question. What is the difference between eco and climate fiction? Yeah.
To this, I would like to say that climate fiction seems to be something which has emerged out of eco-fiction. So it is not something which is completely different from it, but it has emerged out of it. And here we see ideas which are, or here we see that the themes which have been dealt with are something which is happening due to the climate change. So climate change seems to be the main issue, the main concern. And in the other ecological fictions or novels, we can say that climate change is there, but maybe it is not the major theme. So here in Cli-Fi's, it seems to be the major driving force behind writers writing it.
There is a relative question to this asked now by Professor Sudha. Is this a part of science fiction? That's a good question. Yeah,
Yes,
but
yes,
I think you have answered that in your slide itself. Would like to
yes,
say something on that?
I did, sir. But I would just like to add on to it, saying that again, we say that Cli-Fi is genre undefined, so we cannot restrict it to one particular watertight compartment. And it also does resonate with science fiction, because earlier I have said that it has come out of science fiction, or it can be seen to be a sister genre of science fiction. But in science fiction, we see that the setting is different. It can be on other planets. Here the setting is Earth in particular. And also we see that science fiction seems to be more speculative in nature rather than Cli-Fi.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. There is one question from a research scholar, MP Sridevi. It's a good question, but still I like to read that question. Is Dobias Buckwell's Arctic Rising a climate fiction? Could it be worthy to be included in a thesis? She wanted to know.
That definitely is an interesting question, but to be honest, I myself have not read it. But from the title, it seems that it is something to be which deals with climate change, and if so, you definitely could include it in your thesis, because works being done on climate fiction nowadays are in. They are selling like hotcakes. So yes, you can.
Yeah, yeah. There is another question from N. Karpagavalli, and she has asked the question about the role of humans and non-humans in Cli-Fi novels.
That again is quite interesting, because as I said, from 1960 onwards, the fictions which have been written down, they basically uh, pinpoint the fact that human activities have driven this climate change, or humans have been responsible for climate change. And as we see that after the Industrial Revolution, there has been an increased amount of the CO2 gas emission. And because of this, there's also been the climate discussion in Paris in 2016, where every country, they decided on the amount of carbon dioxide they would let their country to emit in the environment. So humans nowadays are considered to be the greatest driving factor behind this climate change, which has become so visible these days.
There is another interesting question from the part of, I mean, maybe from the point of view of a research supervisor. Dr. Mukti Upadhyay has asked this question, and he has asked two questions. I'll read both because that would help you to answer the question collectively. How a climate literature is important or useful to scholars? This is the first part of the question. Do you want me to repeat, or shall I go to the next question?
No, that's fine, sir.
Okay. So the second one is, what is the main concern or contribution of it to the research point of view? So purely from the research point, he is asking a question.
Yes, yes, yes. Uh, I would like to say that climate fiction, or I should begin from saying this, that literature is the mirror of the society, as we say. So climate fiction is no different. It is mirroring or trying to mirror what is happening. And if taking this as a topic for research, or taking this as a topic for research, would definitely do good to scholars who would produce research works, and then they would go to the readers. So it would, how shall I put it? It would make everybody or a larger audience aware of the impending danger and the need of the hour or the action which is supposed to be taken.
Okay,
And to this, I would also like to add on, sir, that here in Denmark, I see that there's a lot of work being done on climate fiction, and there's a lot of emphasis on sustainability. So this idea of sustainability is connected with the global change which is happening, the environmental change which is happening. And this idea of sustainability is something which each one of us could bring in our own lives, irrespective of doing research on it or doing whatsoever on it, but just inculcating in our livelihoods.
And next is a very inquisitive question. A scholar has asked, I believe, can you name any other Indian writer apart from Amitabh Ghosh as a Cliffy?
Yes, yes, this is a very pertinent question, and I was reading a research proposal on climate fiction some time back, and it was actually on uh, the deficit of climate fiction novels being produced by writers of the global south. So we see that there are writers from the global north, US, UK, Germany, who are producing novels on climate fiction, but there still seems to be, if not a dearth, at least visibility of writers from the global south who are writing or taking up this as a theme in their works. So I sadly am not aware of any other writer apart from Amitabh Ghosh. I hope that that answers the question.
Okay. So finally, I have a personal question from myself. Okay, because I have been reading the questions of several research scholars and the faculty members, and I am tempted to ask a question in this regard. Say, most of the climate fiction, as you have presented, are set in future, and
Yes.
maybe that shows the glorious past of any country, I believe. Anyhow, if this future is somewhat dangerous or fearsome or in a very worrying manner, what would be the futuristic perspective of the Cliffy fiction?
Yes, for the futuristic perspective of Cliffy, I would say that as of now, it is still growing. And for writers to take it further ahead, uh, there could be novels written down on specific, very specific themes, like not just climate fiction in general, or maybe the water crisis, but on various other specific themes. Like I came across one novel which was written down on the idea of uh, oils. So what if there is no oil on earth? What if we are, or there is no access to it? Maybe there could be writers who could take up the idea of food shortage. So if we see the future of cli-fi, I'm not a writer, but I can presume that it can be taken ahead by writers who deal with other or try to deal with other topics more specifically than the ones which have already been taken up. And then
Thank,
again, here I would say that they seem to be something which is set in the future, something which is dangerous. But as I said, that fear sells. So they are trying their best to build in that idea of anxiety and awareness, going hand in hand with the idea of being alarmed by what is to come in future.
okay, okay. And this is the final question. Can we correlate the eco-literature theory with Cliffy theory
Yes,
or
definitely. Eco-critical theory can definitely be related and can definitely be employed while studying these cli-fi texts. Definitely.
okay. So at the same time, I can see in the chat box many wonderful remarks, starting from exceptionally well, wonderful, and so clear lecture. So there are so many positive remarks on your lecture
Thank
that
you so much.
you ought to be very happy that your lecture is well received. So let me take this opportunity to thank you for giving a wonderful lecture on Clive fiction, and also drawing a clear-cut mark between eco-literature and Clive fiction. Even though they overlap one another, now we can understand there is a clear-cut division between the two. So I personally thank you for making the division so clear. Thank you, Dr. Saumya. Thank you for giving a wonderful lecture. And over to the organizers now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And I would like to thank the audience too for being patient enough to listen to the whole presentation and coming up with such inquisitive and wonderful questions. And thanks to everybody who has been behind organizing this event.
Thank you very much for your engrossing and insightful lecture, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Thiru sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saumya. Thank you, Dr. Saumya.
Thank you, ma'am.
You have taken us to a new world of fiction, and you have unfolded 6 English novels apart from 2 other language novels. It was a quite inspirational lecture, Dr. Saumya. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words. And I'll be more than happy if anybody from the audience or anybody who has listened through would take up one novel after listening to this webinar. So that would be my contribution to it.
Definitely, you have instigated me to take up one novel at least. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Super, sir.
Huh?